Work-based learning is one of the few avenues that allows young people and students today to build up a skill set alongside AI. The ultimate outcomes for us, that idea, we call them the 4As. Authentic learning, we're really talking about deeper or applied learning around aspiration, abilities, and agency. AI, in a lot of ways, fits into the abilities bucket, those technical and durable skills. It's the aspiration and the agency that you need in order to be an effective and productive partner with AI or partner with technology in your future world that work-based learning also does.
When I started in this work and we were looking at the millennials, they were our young people, employers were saying then that curiosity was the most important skill, and AI was not even part of the conversation at that point. So it's that curiosity and that ability to adapt quickly to shifting circumstances has only become more important rather than being set in your ways and being convinced that you know the right way to do something.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edgy Futures podcast. It is a pleasure and an honour to have you with us, as always. For those people that are listening in rather than watching in, you will see two wonderful guests. You haven't heard their Dorset tones just yet, or dulcet tones, whichever one. Anybody who's listening to the podcast, I don't make any sense. But we'll start again. We've got two guests waiting in the wings for a wonderful conversation around a book that we were sent a few months back, and we're excited to dive in, explore what this means for the global education system and how we can. Ben, what is the name of the title of the book? Come on, we've talked about
Make
it.
school work.
Which we should always be considering every day of the week, but it seems strange that we had to read a book and talk about a book, named it to try and get schools working. Ben, how have you been? How's everything going, man?
Wonderful, my friend. Wonderful. We have got, loads of things happening. Our book's out. We won't want to talk about our book because we're talking about another book, which you'll be able to get in the show notes and want to link to in the show notes. But obviously, our book is out in the world, which is pretty epic. And let's see what happens with that. We think we might have ruffled a few feathers, but that's okay. That's what we do, right? That's what we do, Steve.
I don't know who we're going to invite on to interview us or Ben, or do we interview each other in a few weeks? It's going to be an interesting one to try and get that one done.
I think what we'll do is we'll do like us two and two of us above it, and we'll like kind of superimpose an AI. No, I'm just kidding. No. We'll have a conversation at some point.
In other words, we don't know, so we'll just we'll spitball. Well, we've got guests waiting in the wings, but should we get started? We've got Alexandra and Stephanie, who will tell us a bit about themselves. But before we get to even the title of the book and the book, can you tell us about your background and what drew you to the work and what you're doing now? And Alex, should we start with you first?
Sure. Well, hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Alexandra Levit, Alex for short. And in the spirit of the expertise within this podcast and within you all, I am a workforce futurist, which I think listeners are probably a bit more familiar with futurism and foresight. But just to put it simply, I work with organizations both on the private sector and the public sector side to try to ascertain what is happening, what are the signals that are most likely to lead to disruption that we then have to contend with, and to, in an ideal world, develop strategies to help us become more prepared and also help us create the future that we want. So that's what I do professionally, and I got involved with Steph and GPS Education Partners because for probably 2 decades, I have been looking at this disconnect between what the educational system is providing and what employers are looking for, such that there tends to be this gap where you have a lot of young people who are discouraged workers, who are maybe underemployed or unemployed, and then you have millions of unfilled positions. So there's work available and there's people available, but we're not making the match. Which indicates to me we need to do something for our young people that helps them be prepared and enthusiastic for the jobs they're actually going to be able to get. And this has been a hard problem to solve. You know, it's challenging globally, but I would say here in the U.S. is probably one of the worst places for it. So at the intersection of the work that Steph and I do, it's pretty significant here. And what I noticed about GPS Education Partners is that they brought a really concrete, innovative solution to the problem. And I'll let Steph talk more about work-based learning. But in essence, from my perspective, it means that we expose young people, and expose is a key word, right? We're not trying to like pigeonhole them into another type of career when they're young, but we are exposing them to paths of exploration where they can determine what is possible for their future. And then they can make an educated decision about whether a four-year college is right for them, or whether they should do that right now, or maybe get some job experience first. And it was the first time I'd seen a solution that was more than just theoretical. Like, well, we could do this or we could do that. GPS Ed was doing this throughout the Midwestern United States with tens of thousands of students and all different types of schools, all different types of employers. And so I was really inspired. And I love to come up with solutions in addition to just having the forecast. And so that was what we were trying to do with our partnership and with the book Make School Work.
Wonderful. Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So, my name's Stephanie Loeck. I go by Steph for shorthand. And I'm Vice President of Strategic Development at GPS Education Partners. We're an education nonprofit that bridges education to industry through work-based learning. If you had told me that that was what I was going to be doing in my career, coming out of high school, certainly coming out of college, I probably would have laughed in your face. So, like many of the learners that we serve, I did not start here. I did not have some vision that this is where I would end up, but I feel very lucky that this is the work that I get to do. So, for a decade plus, I've been in this education to workforce pathways space through a policy lens, now through a programmatic lens at GPS Ed. And I'm just so deeply passionate about this idea that we have to give young people a chance to discover themselves and how they can apply themselves in the future world in order to have sort of fulfilling lives and fulfilling careers. And so, paying it forward a little bit from my personal journey and working really hard to ensure that that's an opportunity that every young person has today.
And that's super important, whether you are in the US, whether you're in the UK, wherever you are in the world. Interestingly, on our most recent, we release a trends booklet every year as part of our, we do an annual event in the northwest of England. Generally, it's been in the it's been in the east of England, but this time it's in Liverpool. It's been in Liverpool, and we released our most recent trends booklet, volume 4, and we talked about the idea of how important it is to stay curious, how important it is to understand that it's we versus me. We is greater than me, and that how much it takes a village. We talked about the idea of how important it is to realize that it's not just one person, it's that global community. And then one of the conversations that we have been really passionate about is about leaving the ladder down, and how we make sure that it's really easy, particularly in education and in the work, once you've got up the ladder and you've climbed the ladder, to pull it up behind you. But how do we leave it down? And so grateful that you are doing that and the work that you're doing, and obviously the book that you've written on that. So like Steve said, we got sent a copy of this book, which is called Make School Work. And it says underneath it, solving the American youth employment crisis through work-based learning. So some of the conversations we're going to come up with are definitely going to be around work and the place of work and how learning can lead into that space. And even though it says solving the American youth employment crisis, we're actually having a conversation that will, we think, transpose across the employment challenges again there. And interestingly, you use the word crisis, and I'm going to just go straight. I said it was Steve that would do the tangential rabbit hole places, but I'm going straight in there, which is that word crisis is probably an interesting word. And Keith Grint, Professor Keith Grint, you might be aware of, UK academic, talks about how many people use the word crisis, and what they're talking about is a wicked problem as opposed to a crisis, because crisis makes people think, whereas a wicked problem makes us go, oh, what could we do? And I think actually it's not. I'm not saying it is a crisis. I'm just saying that principle that sits in there. So, what do you think? What makes it a crisis? What do you think makes this idea of the youth employment issue a crisis?
Steph, I don't know. Do you want to start? I can start.
Good.
Okay. I love this question. We haven't gotten asked this question before, which is always my favorite. I think what makes it a crisis is actually rooted in strategic foresight. I think it's not technically a crisis right now. Steph might disagree with me, but what we look at when we do strategic foresight is what's the confluence of factors that are kind of combining together and percolating up to lead to something that's going to be a pretty severe problem. And what we see with the definitely the American system and really the global system is that we have a demographic cliff coming up where we simply are going to have fewer young people available to do any job. And at the same time, there is already a very significant labor shortage in industries like manufacturing that we talk about automation, we talk about the fact that AI is taking over the world, but at the end of the day, if AI is rolled out correctly, and I think we're starting to realize this, it requires a lot of human oversight, and we simply do not have the people. We are not training the people to go into these jobs. At the same time, there is another percolating crisis happening with entry level knowledge workers. And what we are seeing is, for whatever reason, companies tend to blame it on AI, but it may or may not be the cause. We are seeing that organizations globally are hiring fewer young people, which means it's okay for now because they still have a lot of old people, a lot of boomers, a lot of older Gen Xers still in the workforce. But what's going to happen when those folks exit? And we need people to run our organizations. We are not developing a bench that is appropriate for the level of succession planning we need to be doing. And so these are two kind of, I like to call it like a twindemic, things that are happening in the background that really do require us to think about this issue carefully now, because work-based learning, as Steph will talk about, this is not something you can just like set and forget or throw into the world and have it be operationalized immediately. It takes a lot of forethought, it takes a lot of planning, and it takes a lot of coordination with many different stakeholders and parties. And so we need to be doing it now if we want to have it in a couple of years when this really, really becomes a serious issue. And so from my perspective, we are just a couple of years out of a really, really serious labor shortage issue around the globe. And so we hope that work-based learning is something that GPS Ed has already put into practice and made work. We hope that we can scale that, and so we avoid some of the more significant consequences of a true labor crisis.
And just add to that, and maybe it's because I'm feeling Pollyanna-ish this morning. It's that like there's this urgent sort of moral crisis in this, right? The two sort of confluencing trends that Alex mentioned are also driving this incredible inequality that I think is global. It's especially true here within the US. And so what that means is that some kids are getting opportunities toward economic mobility, and some kids are getting opportunities towards a more stable future, and an increasing number of kids aren't. And so for us, the crisis part is that I believe education should be this great door opener for everyone. It's a public good. It should create opportunities for all of us to go out and have a fulfilling future. And I think there's this sense that that sort of hopeful future that students have agency towards is sort of falling out of their grasp. And so we feel the need to do something. We've always needed to do something. We have not been great at solving this problem to date, but it feels like really, really urgent at this moment in time, given what we're looking at in the years ahead.
A really good point
It-
about equality. It's only getting worse with AI too. That's just pulling apart people even more. I've noticed. I don't know what you all think, but
And I think it's a really interesting thing of what you were saying there, Alex, of how far away we are potentially from crisis and how close we're edging. But the problem is to change systems and processes and actually consider how the moment in time of, if we make a decision now, how long will this to be impacted? Like I remember doing some work behind the scenes in terms of radiography. So we were looking at AI in terms of X-rays, and we were looking at all of that and saying, even if we got enough, there's a shortage of radiographers doing the ability to do X-rays quickly and sufficiently in the NHS, and saying, brilliant, we need more. We are going to put those people in to post, great, but to train those people, it takes 5 years, even if when they're just entering degree level. So actually, you've got 5. So when we say we're in terms of how many years we are away, but the problem is if you put something in now and it takes 5 years to change, and 3 years it's coming down, we're already past it. So it's not about how close we are. It's actually the fact that we are potentially, by the time it takes to educate and change those systems, we're already past 2 years beyond it, because it's a 5-year cycle of delivering and educating. And it's a really interesting thing in regards to what you said right at the very beginning. I was going to jump in and I refrained of, you are a work futurist compared to educational futurist. And what the dynamic of that is, work looks, adopts, and says, how do we change in regards to the future? Education looks at it and says, how do we try and dance away from that as long as we possibly can? How do we look at that and avoid? Work says, how do we change? And education often goes, oh, that's coming. How do we avoid the real change? How do we remain the status quo so everything looks exactly the same?
That is a very bold statement, my friend.
I think you're giving the business world a little too much credit there.
Well, I think the business, whether they get it right or wrong, but they actively go, okay, we need to listen, because ultimately, if they don't, they're not going to make a profit. And I'm not saying all businesses. There's literally, I'm talking in sweeping, bold statements rather than actually the great work that's been done in both and the terrible work that's been done in both. But I would say the reason why we're not ready for not the future, but also those changes that are happening now and will impact before we can really see it, is because we've been really avoiding real change. We've been avoiding the ability of what's coming now. So really, it's not futurist. It's do we call it presentism? I don't know what we call it. But what is the
presentist?
Yeah, the presentist of what's happening now. What do we see in the next few years that we can't actually impact through work-based learning, and how do we quickly change it so we're not constantly going through a cycle of, we know this is happening in 5 years, and what do we do for the next 3 years to solve it? And so let's step into that. So is this why we came to write the book? Steph, I don't know whether you want to go first, or Alex, you want to jump in, but how did we get here, and tell us, is this the reason why you come together in terms of education as a solution, work-based learning as a solution to potentially the challenges that we're facing now and in the future? Long question, long thought. Let's go there, though.
Thank you for that. Actually, GPS Ed is unique to this space in education nonprofits in that we were employer founded. So we were started by Generac Power Systems to solve a very real local talent crisis that they were facing. Opening a manufacturing facility in a fairly rural community of Southeast Wisconsin, they had all of these good jobs and no one to fill them. At the same time, the high school was really struggling to keep kids engaged. And so GPS Ed's original cornerstone program started as a second chance program for youth. Rather than trying to go back to the school and say, here's what you need to do to prepare kids for these jobs, they flipped it on its head and said, what if we let kids work first and then wrapped around the education supports? And so that's what they did. And 25 years now later, that program still exists. We serve 220 students a year in a combination alternative education and youth apprenticeship program that spans manufacturing, the trades, automotive, very sort of industrial sector careers. And so I actually think some of the best solutions come from sort of the need and urgency to solve a salient problem that you're dealing with yourself. So to Alex's point, unlike a lot of this work, this didn't start as some like theoretical thing that we were chasing. It was a very real world problem with a very real need that has iterated and continuously improved over time. I actually joined the organization just 2 years ago to help them sort of think about what would the next 25 years look like, which, given everything we're talking about, is a really scary sort of crystal ball to look ahead towards, but thinking about our impact and scale. And so that's when we went I had the opportunity to go really deep with the team and understand what it is that we do within that 25-year program and within our consulting work, and synthesize that together in what we present in the book. And so that framework that is in Make School Work walks you through the why, who, what, how, so what, and now what of work-based learning. It's a change management model that any community can use, that when they are hopefully and very likely facing some of these same really salient problems about the disconnect between school and work, now they have a blueprint that helps them ask all the right questions and think about all the things they would need to do to design a program that's fitted to their unique context.
And would you add anything to that, Alex, in terms of what about coming together and what your purpose was coming into writing a book, I suppose?
Sure. I mean, I do think the change management point is really salient to me, because we see the same issue happening with AI integration across the workforce, where um, the change management piece is so critically important. And what I really love about the GPS ed model is that it gathers a whole bunch of people together who have different priorities and may come at the issue from alternate perspectives, you could say, and gets them on the same page. And this is exceedingly difficult when you have a lot of different moving parts that may not see eye to eye, may not have the same language to describe a problem, and may not have the same ideas with respect to how to solve it. And you bring them to an equal playing field. And sometimes we refer to organizations like GPS Ed as a convener of stakeholders. And I think that piece is so incredibly important. So I would just add that in terms of the value that I personally see from this model, and how I came to be involved in the project is just I've been writing books on the future of work for about 20 plus years now. And so I have that experience. But when I write a new book, I always like to talk about something I haven't discussed before. I'm not one of those people who just sort of repackages what their main idea is every 5 years. If I'm going to do a new book, it's going to have an innovative, novel type of solution to a problem. And so, in looking for my next opportunity, when I met the folks at GPS Ed, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the next book. This is perfect. And they, at the same time, they had never done a book before, so they were eager to have, I guess, the expertise of someone who'd done it a lot, who's been a journalist, who understood how the process worked. And so that's how we came together. Really, it was, I mean, we talk about meeting the needs of diverse stakeholders. And I guess we, in a way, we are a microcosm of that. I had one set of objectives, they had another set of objectives, and we looked for the overlap. And that's how we came to be where we are. And we are extremely excited to be getting this book out in the world. And um, again, it's something that, as Steph said, anyone can take, even if you've got a tiny program. I mean, this isn't something that needs to start with some like massive, massive infrastructure change. You can do it in your local community, and we give you really step-by-step instructions about how you can go about it, even if you're part of circumstances that might not seem ideal. There is movement you can make, and so that practical bent has always been very appealing to me, and we just hope to alert as many people as possible. So we thank you both for your support.
Yeah, no worries. Get
Steve,
it. So go on.
I was just going to say, Steve, you made this like really bold statement that I don't necessarily disagree with on the surface, that like business has been consistently sort of iterating and likes to think of itself as agile in terms of adapting towards the future. And education has largely been resistant to that. I actually, to Alex's point, think it's because they see themselves with very different purposes, right? And like work is about productivity, it's about economic impact, and education really views itself, and there's a broad spectrum of folks who do this, but in sort of preparing people for the future. In former work of mine, we used to say, well, yeah, but everyone's future is probably going to require a job. So why not be really mindful of what's going on in that space? But when you really ask sort of educators what they're trying to do, they're trying to set people up for successful lives with this really holistic view. And a lot of the things that schools are about the things that don't change as quickly as business. It's about sort of how to be a person. It's about durable skills like critical thinking and communication and cooperation and empathy. Like, how do we show up as good citizens in our community? And so the idea of sort of changing all of that to meet what the workforce needs really doesn't fill the cup of a lot of folks. And so there is this sort of magic of facilitating compromise in a room with people who view their world and purpose through those two wildly different lenses and convince them that it's actually the same end and that if we partner together, we can do this far better in preparing young people for that future success. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about in the book and in what we've shared.
Yeah, I
Steph, I've never heard you say it quite that way before, and I absolutely loved that. Just want to tell
I
you.
think I think what's key there is people often say it's education isn't about preparing the workforce of tomorrow. I think that is an element of it, but ultimately the workforce and business changes so often that actually it's not. And there used to be a conversation in England, and I'm sure this is global in terms of knowledge versus skills, knowledge-rich curriculum versus skills. And I was like, no, it's a collective hive mind of both, and also how we've had people on the podcast talking about play, but also the definition and the terminology of play. You attach play to very young children in regards to early years, but actually tinkering, experimenting into engineers and science and all of those different things takes knowledge so you don't blow the place up, but you've still got to learn cancer research. So if we only use the knowledge that we have now, we're never going to find a solution to anything new. How do we go through that, and how do we experiment, and how do we change? But I suppose the question is, education has to be all of those things and is so diverse. But there will be people that listen and look at the book and go, make school work and go, we already do that. There are hours, and is there a challenge at times with confidence and ability? And I'm not saying that for all, but some people go, that book's not for me because I'm already doing it great. And it's all that thing of how do we make it work so people pick it up and go, actually, the learning process for all of us, if we just open our minds and then say, you will be doing a great job in some aspects, but there is more learning for us to do. How do we do it better for all?
I mean, I think anyone who's in the space who works with young people today feels and sees and notices this sort of collective consciousness and fear and anxiety that young people have about their future. That, I can say very confidently, I am a millennial. And like, I remember having a little bit of anxiety about my next steps, but it was pretty laid out of like, oh, yeah, you go to college and then you'll get a good job and you'll do all these things. And the world has definitely not worked out that way. But I think young people today are just there's so many like mental health struggles and so much anxiety and so much fear that we want to do something different. Like we feel something very different that young people need. And I know for myself, I certainly want to be there to help them through that. So ultimately for us, we define high quality work-based learning as authentic learning that develops a student's aspiration, abilities, and agency to succeed in the world of work. And really, at its core, it's simply about helping them discover themselves and feel more confident about that next step. So it's not about sort of solving all the things, but just really about kind of lessening some of that anxiety that they have of moving out of their safe space and into their next stage of their life in this world.
And I agree with what Steph said. And ironically, this does get to the heart of what some educators are passionate about, which is preparing the whole human for the lives that they are going to have after our official tenure of school is over. Because these crises that young people are facing are not just educational in nature. Really, their entire identity is threatened by the way that our society is is going. And so I think through a lens of work-based learning, we can offer a more rewarding, calmer, I don't know. I don't know, for some reason the word calm is but give them something that makes sense that they can then move forward with and help them feel a little bit more grounded in this world where all of us feel a bit unmoored. Even those of us who've been in the business world for 25 years, like myself, I have never quite seen anything like this. And I can only imagine being a young person trying to find your way, trying to establish your identity in the midst of all these disruptive factors. And so I think that the approach that work-based learning has is really helpful to young people who just don't know what to make of all of this and are increasingly anxious, increasingly depressed, and increasingly cut adrift from the paths that may be available to them. So I think it's a great point, Steph.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I always come on the podcast and come with a few hats as a former teacher, as somebody who works in education or on education now in terms of like the consultancy work that I do, but also as a dad. So I've got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old now. So she's just recently gone 12. So that the two girls growing up in the UK, which is fragmented, tick, that mirrors across the pond, right? It's increasingly fragmented. It's increasingly driven around technology and how technology is bad, and all screen time is equal, and therefore we need to ban screens and we need to ban social media. I'm just thinking, I feel like we're missing the point. But I've got these two humans in the space who are trying to navigate what happens next. And many of the listeners will be familiar that my eldest daughter has decided she wants to be a trauma surgeon in the army, which is very specific. Neither me or her mum are in medicine, and nobody from our family has been in the forces. So, like, for that to be something that she's wanted to do, it's quite specific. And then we're having the conversation about, okay, well, the replication piece and whether there is the other bit that sits with that. I think my big challenge to us is saying, okay, well, how can you do that? How can you move into that skill space and that desire? And is that the right thing? What do you need to do? And how we you making sure that that's not a replacement issue? My other bit that sits there is the fact that my 12-year-old is very much a dancer, drama, musical theatre, that space. And she's like, I'd love to be in a career in that. And you're going, is there a career in that? Like, yes, there is. But how niche is that? It's like elite sport in the same space, right? Like, yeah, is it a passion? Is it a job? What do you do? She's an extremely capable human being when it comes to lots of areas, but a passion lies in there. And interestingly, then, there is this, as Steve like touched on when he was mentioning last time, is this idea that school is about preparing people for the world of work. And we have fought really hard on the podcast and in communication everywhere, is that, can we stop using that phrase, preparing people for the world of work? No, let's prepare young people for the world, full stop. Right. And I get the conversation that we're about to go into is about work-based learning and making sure that we're preparing young people for a workplace and understanding what that looks like. But when it's moving at a pace, and obviously both of you two will be in that position of understanding that the workplace is changing, and how we navigate those change frameworks is going to be really important. And that's why you've written this. I think it's got to come from that place, in my perspective, of thinking about how do we prepare young people for the future, the world, and then work will be part of that. And interestingly, some of the brightest thinkers in the world are suggesting that work might look very, very different, if at all, and this universal income conversations, whether that's basic income or prosperous income or acceptable income or whatever it looks like. So, and I saw both of your eyes flutter then, because it's like, oh yeah, that conversation again. But I really want us to get into now, okay, then, based on what you've written about, how are we preparing young people for that world, and what does that look like when it comes to a framework around work-based learning? So I wonder if you want to go to this, Alex, first, because I thought I saw that more of a flutter around when he used that word universal basic income and the conversation of whether work will exist.
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is what you said about technology. and young people's increasing, and boy, has this blown up in the last like 24 months. Not only is everybody afraid of what AI is going to do to our society, but young people are actually viscerally against it. And this isn't everybody, but it is a trend globally that we are seeing. And you combine that with the fact that, yes, I don't think the arrival of AI in the workplace in particular is going to be as catastrophic as people think. But it will be a situation in which young people and really everyone have to learn to work with it. And this this appalled stance that they have is not going to be particularly helpful. And so one of the things that I've spotted in work-based learning as preparing kids for the world in general in which they will have to be and operate alongside AI is that it exposes them to very specific technologies that are new in, let's say, a manufacturing setting. Maybe it's a new piece of automation that has never been used before that has a very distinct function. And the young person comes in and they start to work with that technology. And the technology and the young person essentially grow up together. So as the young person is gaining more experience, the technology is getting more sophisticated. And then what do you have in a couple of years? You have a technology that's increasingly complex, but you also have a young person who understands it inside and out, and most importantly, does not view it with stigma, views it as it's meant to be used, which is as a facilitator of more meaningful human work. This is going to take over one part of our job, but we're still going to have a role, and this is what the role is going to be. So I view work-based learning as being rather uniquely positioned to expose people to technology in this way. And then a wildly different topic, of course, is UBI. And I actually did my thesis for my certification in strategic foresight on UBI. And this was 5 years ago. And the conclusion that I came to was that it is inevitable on some level, and that it does tend to work, in my mind, a bit more surprisingly than I don't know. I always thought, oh, you give people money and that means they're not going to do anything. But that wasn't really what the research has shown so far. It's shown that when people are given a little bit of an extra hand up, they actually are more successful, both professionally and personally. It's a hard topic for us to talk about here in the US because I think so many of us are pretty convinced it will never happen here. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on your point of view. But I think even if it were logically and morally the best thing to do, I don't think in the United States we are on a path to doing this kind of thing. Now, the UK is very different, as are other European countries, and even places like Canada. They've done a pilot of it. Places in Asia could potentially be rolled out. So I do think there is a future for UBI. I just wonder about, when we're talking about the American youth crisis, I'm like, I don't think UBI is going to be in that mix anytime soon. Steph, I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, I would just add to that and, keeping out of any of the conversations where I would love to see something like that happen. But to your point that it feels like so wildly unlikely, um, one of the greatest values of work-based learning is that it helps kids figure out what not to do. So we see it just as much of a win if you try something and you're like, oh, not for me. Then if you try something and like your daughter, Ben, you're like, oh, I'm now going to be in the service and go be a trauma engineer because I've lit my path up that way. I actually see a little bit of myself in both your daughters, but specifically, I was sort of the choir, theater, dance kid, and because I decided pretty early on that the sight of blood made me lose my lunch, that I was going to like take this performing arts path. And in high school, I actually had the opportunity to work in a regional dinner theater and around all these adults that had pursued this as their career. And like, I went in being like, this is what I'm going to do. This is my life. And then I met a whole bunch of adults who were so passionate about what they did, loved getting on stage, who were also like barely scraping by on a lot of other fronts, waiting tables at the dinner theater, teaching piano lessons, picking up extra jobs when they could. And I just had this moment where I said, like, I love this, but I know it's a hobby because there's all sorts of other things that I could do with my career that lead me to the life that's closer to what I want. And so that was like that in and of itself is a super valuable work-based learning experience. And we want more kids to have those sorts of experiences. Before you commit to a pathway that's going to take you 5, 7, 8 years down the line and then decide, oh my God, I hate this. To like try it in a much more bite-sized piece and really be able to sit in some of those navigating decision points that are really, really critical for a young person. And it's not always that they're deciding against something and like positively towards something else. It's just that they can say with confidence, they know that thing is not for them. So they can cross it off the list. And when there's infinite sort of possibilities with what our future can look like, that can do just as much for a kid's confidence as finding the thing that like is going to light them up for the next 10, 15, 20 years of their life.
I I completely agree with everything you said, and it's funny for me because I've actually done a little bit of a change in my parenting as a result of getting to know the folks at GPS said. So I have an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old. My 18-year-old has always said he wants to go into aerospace engineering with having no idea what that actually encompasses because we have no work-based learning here in the city of Chicago. So it's completely theoretical. He's going to college next year. We're going to spend a ton of money where he is going to learn all of the small practicalities of this type of career, and we will have invested quite a lot of time and resources without knowing whether this is going to be right for him or whether he's going to hate it or love it. It's a huge risk. So with my daughter who's younger, similar to you, Steph, when you were younger, Ben, similar to your daughter, is very much into musical theater. And so what I really want her to see is, what is this life going to be like? Not just that you love to sing and dance and be on stage, but if you go into this, like, what's the reality of this career? And so I'm making her do work-based learning before she gets the expensive degree in it because of everything I've learned the last couple of years. And so she's going to be part of a theater here in Chicago that's actually nationally known in the US called Steppenwolf. And she will be learning not just about musical theater and theater in general, but the business of theater. So that gives her a little bit of an alternative for still being involved in this industry, but doing something that actually has legs from an income and GPS likes to call it like a family sustaining income, which I love that. It's so practical. It's perfect. It's like, yes, this will allow her to have enough money so that she doesn't always have to be struggling. But I want her to see if she likes that either. I mean, maybe she hates casting, maybe she hates directing or producing. Better to find out now than to go and, spend God knows how much money on a university education that looks at this. So just want to say that GPS and this framework has inspired me so much that I've actually changed my parenting from one child to the next.
In a world where UBI here feels very out of reach, that family sustaining wage
Mhm.
in your future becomes incredibly important to think about for most people.
And also, it could be work, but it also could just be a curiosity of something that becomes a passion or a hobby or something else. And it's the ability to be creative but be curious. And in our education systems, we need to give more to curiosity. Of if you want to explore a subject, it's so full of different things that you, even in the maybe your favorite topic or subject, it's so you've got to get 36 different elements of a subject in before you even move on to something else. It's like, no, I want to just spend a little bit more time immersed here. Like, I love sports, I love PE, but ultimately I did become a PE teacher for a period. But actually, my interest is watching sport, playing sport, taking part in sport. Now it's not a work or an employment. What does that look like, feel like? And it is very different. And without that curiosity, how can you navigate that ultimately become something? And I found it difficult at one point because my daughter, who is only 5, was like, "I'm not really sure I like PE." And I was like, "What? What you even? What do you like?" I was like, "What kind of sport?" And bear in mind, I've seen her since she kind of went into reception doing sports day, and she's absolutely ridiculously rapid. She's so fast. And I was like, "Okay, well, do you want to run? Do you want?" But the problem is, it's so shackled that ultimately it's like, does she even understand that this is PE and there's so much more opportunities in there? There's individual and team sports. And I think that's a problem, that even if you find a passion, we don't allow that extension of curiosity, because it either becomes work, or could this, like Ben said, could it be a job? Well, it might not be a job. It might be a passion, and you might go into amateur dramatics or something else around it. And yes, you need to be able to pay the bills, but there's also life is supported beyond just that employment and that payment, isn't it? And I think, how do we support curiosity in those bits that you might not be paid for, volunteering, charity work, and everything else alongside it? We need to spend more time there. And I think the framework and the conversation fits it all, building curiosity around not just work, but exploration. Let's throw AI into the mix. Do you know what do you think about work-based, and it's everywhere in business? If you can, also an education conference, if you can find a talk that doesn't have AI in it, I will give you a prize right now. Maybe a goldfish is normally something you get at the circus in England. But what does that look like, and how does that throw into the mix of the need for work-based learning and the changes rapidly happening at both education and work landscape coming together? Stephanie.
I was going to say, Alex spoke to this really eloquently about how work-based learning is one of the few avenues that allows young people and students today sort of build up a skill set alongside AI. I always like to think about it just through all of the other potential things that work-based learning can do. The ultimate outcomes for us, ultimately, that idea, we call them the 4A's. Authentic learning, we're really talking about deeper or applied learning around aspiration, abilities, and agency. AI, in a lot of ways, fits into the abilities bucket, those technical and durable skills. It's the aspiration and the agency that you need in order to be an effective and productive sort of partner with AI or partner with technology in our future world that work-based learning also does. And so it's those interesting, sort of very human-based outcomes that I think are really critical to think about in this moment in time when we're talking about AI. And to Alex's point, we get asked this on every interview, and it is just sort of like it's the topic of conversation at the moment. And much like Alex, when I started this work a decade plus ago, we were talking about the future of work. The conversation doesn't seem to have changed that much in terms of needing to think differently for education, preparing students for the future. The urgency of it has, because the rate of change is just continuing to accelerate. And so now we're breaking things in a way that I think people are really honestly taking a hard look at what they're doing and willing to think about doing something else.
I think that was said perfectly, Steph. Yeah, you did a great job of putting forth the urgency nature of it, because I mean, exactly like what Steph alluded to, when I started in this work and we were looking at the millennials, they were our young people. Employers were saying then that curiosity was the most important skill, and AI was not even part of the conversation at that point. So it's that curiosity and that ability to adapt quickly to shifting circumstances has only become more important, rather than being set in your ways and being convinced that you know the right way to do something. And it's an interesting skill set that real work-based learning provides to young people who tend to have not all of them, but a lot of them tend to have the idea that they know everything. And when they are presented with a real work situation, and it doesn't even really matter what that work situation is necessarily, but if they're there on a daily basis, they see the realities of how things actually work, and that there is so much that they have to learn. So going back to Steph's point about learning what they like and they don't like, or, oh my gosh, I had no idea a job would be like this. That is extremely valuable and is not something that can really be taught any other way. And AI is changing our jobs by the day. And so that ability to be curious and that ability to be adaptable has never been more important, because of the speed at which you have to pivot and figure out, okay, I'm in this line of work, I have this skill set, but I need to continue to be gainfully employed. So what adjacent skills am I going to develop? And the onus is now more than ever on the employee to do this. Your company is maybe telling you you need to develop some basic AI literacy, if you're lucky, but you may get no guidance at all. And you do not want to give over the power to your managers or your leaders to say, this is how I think AI can be implemented in your business process, in your workflows, because then that takes the power away from you. If you're in the front lines and say, hey, I did a work-based learning program in high school where I learned how this augmented reality technology, as an example, could be adapted for the instructional process. And you take that into your workplace and then you present a similar solution to your boss. You've just maintained oversight and control over that business process. Even as a young person, you could do this. And this is the nut that every single person working in the globe on the globe today has to do. So work-based learning is just exposing kids to that at a younger age. And AI is at the forefront and of course highly relevant to that discussion.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we are coming into land in terms of time. So there is loads that we could have talked about that we haven't been able to get into yet. But obviously, get a copy of the book. You'll be able to look at the framework, how that's designed, and all the other bits that go with it. Every EduFuturist podcast ends with 3 quickfire questions, and the clue is in the title. Quickfire. So we'll see. We want to make sure that everybody gets an opportunity to speak on this. So we'll come to you first, Steph, and then I'll come to you, Alex. There's 3 questions. I'll do the first one, Steve will do the second one, and I'll do the third one. So the first one is this: if schools were judged like restaurants by how much customers actually enjoyed the process, their experience, what would change overnight?
Schools would be much more personalized and offer individualizable menu items for kids to consume.
Thanks, Steph. Alex?
I love Steph's answer. And I would just say that the emphasis on human relationships is built up. I think schools do this well. They could do it better. We need to be really focusing on that person-to-person rapport that you can only get when you put a group of humans or 2 humans together.
Wonderful. Next question. What's the most dangerous myth that educators tell themselves to avoid real change, Stephanie?
That we have to get it right for every kid to try something new. So we're so risk averse. We're not willing to improve our practice for just a handful of kids who might need something different for fear that it doesn't serve every kid the same way.
Alex?
Yeah, and similarly on that point, that this is something that we should only be offering to kids for whom traditional education is not successful. In fact, this is something that can be highly relevant and useful to kids with all types of abilities.
It's like they need a pick and mix education. Somebody should have written a book like that. That's the title of our book, by the way, if you didn't know. The third question to you, Steph, is: if a 10-year-old asked you why they actually have to go to school, what would you say?
Well, I have an infant daughter, so I'm on the youngest side of all of this for all of you. And I really hope the question she's asking me is why can't she go to school? Because she loves learning and loves being around her people and loves being in that space so much.
I view learning as in school as a method to be successful in the world and be happy in the world. If you're just sitting at home not going to school, I don't think you're going to be particularly happy. And as Steph mentioned earlier, we see a lot of mental health problems in the Gen Z and Gen Alpha generations that are only exacerbated by them sitting at home on their devices. So you're going to school so that you can be with your people.
Love it. Well, Steph, Alex, thank you so much for joining us on the Edge of Futurist podcast. And if you want to get a copy of Make School Work, look, we're holding it up. This is what we do. Making School Work, solving the American, US, wherever else you, UK, wherever you are in the world, youth employment crisis through work-based learning. Please do get a copy of this, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And as ever, thank you for joining us in the studio, and thank you for watching. And if you got to the end and you aren't already subscribed, please make sure you do, because that's how we build this. So thank you so much. Alex, Steph, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Shaping